Hi, this is Daryl Myatt from Keller, Texas. Today is Wednesday, February 16th, 2011. There's a lot of things going on today, so I want to get right to it. Try to keep these videos somewhat short, but a lot of info. This first story out of the JerusalemPost.com says Iranian warships to cross the Mediterranean. The Israeli Navy will be tracking 2 Iranian warships as they make a rare crossing of the Suez Canal late tonight, Wednesday night, and sail into the Mediterranean Sea. The 2 ships will cross into the Mediterranean Sea on their way to Syria, where Damascus is. Defense officials said that Israel would track the ships, but that their presence in the sea would not change anything for the Navy's operational deployment. It is strange for the Iranian Navy to use the Suez Canal since it really doesn't have anything to look for in the Mediterranean Sea, one official said. Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman called the planned crossing of the Suez by the Iranian ships a provocation that proves that the overconfidence of the Iranians is growing from day to day. Speaking at a meeting of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations in Jerusalem, Lieberman lashed out at the international community, which he said was regretfully not doing enough to confront the Iranian provocations. Lieberman also said he expected the world to put the Iranians in their place. We are the true allies of the United States in the region and the only ones that share its values, he said. The international community needs to understand that Israel will not be able to ignore these provocations forever, he said further. The Iranian Navy has a number of old frigates that were built in the United Kingdom in the 1970s. In 2010, Iran claimed to have launched a domestically manufactured multi-purpose corvette called Jamaran, which is believed to carry torpedoes, missiles, and rapid-fire cannons. Okay, so I saw another story that said Iran planned to dock these 2 ships in Syria for as long as a year. Interesting. So now Iran is trying to surround them on the seaside as well, on the western side of Israel, since they now have Hezbollah in Lebanon, pretty much controlling Lebanon from the northern side. They've got Hamas in the south. They're soon going to have Egypt on the southwest side, and possibly Jordan on the eastern side. So Israel's enemies are lining up and surrounding her right now. We're watching it happen. And most of the world doesn't even seem to care. It's amazing. Speaking of Jordan, here's something out of the Jerusalem Post also. Jordanian minister calls Israel an enemy and terrorist state. Wow, that didn't take long, did it? Jordan's new Justice Minister, Hussein Majali, called Israel an enemy and terrorist state in an interview with Jordanian Arabic News Daily. Majali joined protests in Jordan demanding the release of Ahmed al-Daqamish, a convicted terrorist who gunned down 7 11-year-old Israeli schoolgirls in 1997. I told you about that yesterday. So, Jordan's foreign ministry is already calling Israel an enemy. You know, Egypt and Jordan were the last 2 of the states around Israel that had a peace agreement with Israel. And now suddenly it looks like those 2 peace agreements are going by the wayside. Psalm 83 speaks of this. The Psalm 83 war, I think we're seeing it line up right now. And Jordan was one of the last dominoes to fall to make this happen. Here's this guy saying they're an enemy, and we're not going to have a peace agreement with them. And for them to call this guy who killed 7 11-year-old girls, for them to call him a hero, is just twisted and sick. I mean, okay, if these 11-year-old girls were like dressed up and had rocket launchers and were firing at the Jordanian embassy, okay, whatever, but they weren't. They were on a school field trip. 11-year-old girls. I'd like to hang that guy by his toenails. Alright, let's see what else is happening. Here's an interesting story out of theblaze.com. Austrian free speech activist faces jail time for criticizing Islam and Sharia law. In Austria, a free speech activist whose name is Elizabeth Elizabeth Sabaditsch-Wolff has been charged with inciting religious hatred and faces 3 years in prison after criticizing Islam and Sharia law. Comments similar to those recently expounded by major European leaders in the UK, France, and Germany on the failures of multiculturalism. Okay, don't we still have freedom of speech? So you can say something and go to jail? That doesn't sound like freedom of speech to me. Let me just go on the record, because I too would like to criticize Islam and Sharia law. First of all, I believe this religion is from the devil himself. Muhammad didn't see the angel Gabriel in a cave. He saw the devil disguised as an angel. Most angels don't appear to people in caves. Secondly, the fact that Islam denies that Jesus is the Son of God. Islam also denies that Jesus died on the cross and rose from the dead. Islam also claims that Abraham nearly sacrificed Ishmael instead of Isaac, the true son he nearly sacrificed, thereby making themselves heirs to the promises of God. This religion is full of lies, it's full of hatred, it has twisted the truth of the Holy Bible to further their own agenda, and in Psalm 83, all these nations listed are Muslim majority nations, and the Bible calls them enemies of God. Okay? Muhammad was illiterate. He couldn't read. He couldn't write. He was that ignorant. That's why he was so easily fooled by Satan disguising himself as an angel of light. Anyone following this religion is destined for hell because they do not have the truth of Jesus Christ, the Messiah and Savior of the world and the Son of God, actually God in flesh. So, I too criticize this Islam, Sharia law. I don't hate Muslims, don't get me wrong. I pray for them to come out of this cave, this dark cave they've been in, and find the light of truth of Jesus Christ. But they need to know that what they're following is a lie. Okay, their book says Allah has no heirs, no son. Obviously they're praying to the wrong God. Okay, so they need to wake up and realize the error of their ways. They've been brainwashed all their lives with these lies, and they've bought it hook, line, and sinker. There's a good reason it needs to be criticized, because it's fake. It's a false religion. Good thing I live in America, where, let's see, I still have freedom of speech, right? Okay, let's move on. Let's see, here's something out of yahoo.com. Hezbollah threatens Israeli leaders. This out of Beirut today. The head of Hezbollah urged his fighters today to stand ready to take Galilee in any future Lebanon-Israel war, and threatened Israeli leaders anytime, anywhere, to avenge a top operative's killing. I say to the fighters of the Islamic resistance, be ready. If a new war is imposed on Lebanon, we may ask you to take Galilee to free Galilee, Hassan Nasrallah said in a televised speech to mark his Shiite party's Martyrs' Day. He said, I hope the people of Israel have good bomb shelters. Nasrallah vowed that the assassination of Ahmad Mugniya, probably butchered that name, killed in a February 2008 car bombing in Damascus that Iranian-backed Hezbollah has blamed on Israel, would not be forgotten or go unpunished. Nasrallah says, to the Zionist generals I say, anywhere you go in the world at any time, watch out, for the blood of Ahmad will not go to waste. Of course, a month-long war between Hezbollah and Israel in 2006 destroyed much of Lebanon's infrastructure and killed more than 1,200 Lebanese, mainly civilians, and 160 Israelis, mainly soldiers. Nasrallah's comments came a day after Israeli Defense Minister Ehud Barak warned that his army may have to re-enter Lebanon to ensure Hezbollah remembers the 2006 war. I'm going to read you a little quote from that here in just a second. A lot of resistance going on over there. We're hearing a lot of saber rattling, a lot of positioning, people getting ready for this, and it's sadly, I think, about to come to a head, people. It's getting pretty serious. Let's look at it from another perspective out of the Jerusalem Post. Nasrallah calls Gantz weak, says Israel has lost its confidence due to Mideast turmoil, Hezbollah leader says he will avenge the death of their leader. Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah said today he's ready for another war with Israel. Ready for another war. A lot of this is repeating some of the things I just read, but you know, this new military leader in Israel, Gantz, who has just been sworn in this week, went to visit the Lebanon border, Nasrallah said, referring to the new IDF chief of staff. He is the one that was defeated and pulled IDF troops out of Lebanon. You have a completely weak chief of staff, Nasrallah says of the new chief of staff. Let's see. Nasrallah added that Israel is no longer as confident as it once was. He explained that the Middle East's main problem is the existence of Israel. Wow. Anyway, this can't keep going on the way it is. There's going to be something that will trigger this. Here's a story. Let me read this next story here. It says this out of the Telegraph.co. Israel may have to re-enter Lebanon. The Israeli army may have to enter Lebanon again to ensure Hezbollah remembers the lessons of the 2006 war, according to Ehud Barak. He was speaking during a tour of the northern border with the new military chief of staff, Benny Gantz. The Israeli defense minister said, even though it's quiet and deterrence exists, Hezbollah remembers the heavy beating they suffered from us in 2006, but it is not forever, and you may be called to enter again. We must be prepared for every test, Mr. Barak told troops, according to the Haaretz newspaper. The secret is reacting fast in the event that something happens, and within seconds, translating everything you learned in your training. And they may very well have to go back into Lebanon quite soon. Okay, here's something out of Israel today. Israeli minister says we will never leave Hebron, or Hebron as they pronounce it there. Israeli education minister Gideon Sa'ar said today that Israel must stop misleading the Palestinians and the international community into thinking the Arab-dominated Judean town of Hebron will one day be Jew-free, and instead clearly declare that Jews will never leave what is their second most holy city. Hebron sits in the middle of the southern part of the so-called West Bank territory, claimed by the Palestinians for a future state. The Palestinians insist that Jews will not be allowed to live in that state and fully believe that international pressure will eventually force Israel to evacuate all Jews from there, just as all 10,000 of Gaza's Jews were uprooted in 2005. Saur said it is time for Israel to put that misguided thinking to rest. Hebron and the neighboring Jewish town of Kiryat Arba are some of the most important places to the Jewish people, he said during a tour of the Judean towns. Hebron is the location of the Cave of the Patriarchs, the burial place of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, and Leah. No Ishmael. All of the patriots and matriarchs of the Jewish people, with the exception of Rachel, who's buried in Bethlehem. Hebron is also one of the oldest towns on earth with a continual Jewish presence and was the first capital of Israel's most beloved king, David. It is second only to Jerusalem in importance and holiness to the Jewish people, though the media's portrayal of the Middle East peace process has almost entirely erased that fact, and today Hebron is presented as just another Palestinian town occupied by Israel. Okay, let's think of the Muslims' second most holy city. Okay, you got Mecca as their first one, Medina is their second. So their third, they think they need to have a shared capital with Israel in. Why not their first or second? Go there. That's my thoughts. Here's something out of Yahoo. Egypt-inspired protests gain pace across the region. Anti-government protests inspired by popular revolts that topped rulers in Tunisia and Egypt are gaining pace around the Middle East and North Africa, despite political and economic concessions by nervous governments. Clashes were reported in tightly controlled oil producer Libya, sandwiched between Egypt and Tunisia, while new protests erupted in Bahrain, Yemen, and Iran on Wednesday. I told you Iran was about to go crazy. The latest demonstrations against long-serving rulers came after President Barack Obama commented on the overthrow of Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak, declaring the world is changing. If you are governing these countries, you've got to get out ahead of change. You can't be behind the curve. Interesting. Okay, here's some food for thought for you. You know, a lot of people think we're in Iraq because of oil. You know, we want to get into Iran because of oil. All this stuff about oil, oil, oil. Okay, here's something I want to present to you. About 6 months ago, there was a writer that was watching a news program on oil, and one of the Forbes brothers was the guest. The host said to Forbes, "I'm going to ask you a direct question. I'd like a direct answer. How much oil does the U.S. have in the ground?" Forbes did not miss a beat. He said more than all the Middle East put together. Okay, the U.S. Geological Service issued a report in April 2008 that only scientists and oil men knew was coming, but it was big. It was a revised report, hadn't been updated since 1995, on how much oil was in this area of the western two-thirds of North Dakota, western South Dakota, and the extreme eastern Montana. Check this out. The Bakken is the largest domestic oil discovery since Alaska's Prudhoe Bay and has the potential to eliminate all American dependence on foreign oil. The Energy Information Administration estimates it has 503 billion barrels of oil. Even if just 10% of the oil is recoverable at $107 a barrel, we're looking at a resource base worth more than $5 trillion. Okay, this is now the highest producing onshore oil field found in the past 56 years, reports the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. Its formation is known as the Williston Basin, but is more commonly referred to as the Bakken. Okay, U.S. oil exploration has been considered a dead end. Even the big oil companies gave up searching for major oil wells decades ago, but now we have access to up to 500 billion barrels. And those billions of barrels will cost Americans just $16 a barrel. That's enough crude to fully fuel the American economy for over 2,000 years straight. Hello? Hello? This report came from 2006, actually. So, hidden beneath 1,000 feet of the Rocky Mountains lies the largest untapped oil reserve in the world, more than 2 trillion barrels. Okay? On August 8, 2005, President Bush mandated its extraction. In 3.5 years of high oil prices, none has been extracted. So, why is that? Well, we have more oil inside our borders than all other proven reserves on Earth. We have 8 times as much oil as Saudi Arabia, 18 times as much as Iraq, 21 times as much as Kuwait, 22 times as much oil as Iran, 500 times as much as Yemen, right here in the western United States. Why aren't we extracting this? Environmentalists have blocked all efforts to help America become independent of foreign oil. We're letting a small group of people dictate our lives and our economy. Why? James Bartis, the lead researcher with the study, says we've got more oil in this very compact area than the entire Middle East. We need to tell these environmentalists, sit down, shut up, we're going to go get the oil that's rightfully ours. Who agrees with me? And we could tell all these Middle Eastern countries, we don't need your oil. You think OPEC might be paying off these environmentalists? Better believe it. Makes me sick. We got enough oil right here. We don't need to go anywhere else to get it. Don't have to import it. We could be exporting it. Alright. Talking about parables. I think I'll be in parables for a while. There's so many of them and so many lessons we can learn from them. Let's go to Matthew 13, verse 33. Another parable, he spoke to them, the kingdom of heaven is like leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal till it was all leavened. Okay, this is a very short parable. It's just this one verse, and he doesn't really explain it. But context is critical when it comes to interpreting the Bible, especially when it comes to parables. Okay, if we're not familiar with what preceded and prompted the parables, then understanding their meaning becomes more of a guessing game. So that's certainly the case here, as Jesus shares that the kingdom of heaven is like leaven, or yeast, for a more modern term. In context, Jesus is sharing the conditions that the kingdom of heaven will experience, as represented by the Christian church. Now, the previous parable, he revealed that the church would experience unnatural growth, but that this growth would actually attract satanic attention. That's our context. Now, biblically, leaven represents the way sin spreads and infects everything around it. As in 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 6 through 8. Your glory is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? Therefore purge out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, since you truly are unleavened. For indeed Christ our Passover was sacrificed for us. Therefore let us keep the feast, not with old leaven, nor with the leaven of malice and wickedness, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. Okay? So, Jesus told us that the enemy is going to be attracted to the church, and as a result, compromise and corruption are going to infiltrate and infect it. Many of you have witnessed this. Some of you have told me, oh, my church is preaching this false doctrine. They're talking about this, talking about that. I know a lot of you have left churches because they were misinterpreting the Word of God, or they were speaking something to you that became a compromise of the truth to try to not offend anyone or something like that. And sadly, this has proven to be a trend since the church was first born. I mean, it happened as early on as Acts 5 verses 1 through 11 with Ananias and Sapphira lying to the church when they sold this piece of land, claiming they gave all the money to the church when they kept some of it to themselves, and they instantly died on the spot because of this compromise and this satanic influence in the church. And you've seen this influence as recently, probably as the evening news last night. Okay? But we need to recognize that Jesus' point wasn't to discourage us with this parable, but to encourage us to keep our eyes open and our guard up against sin in our church and even in our own lives. Okay? None of us are going to be perfect in this life. Romans 3:23 is clear. All have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So we're not going to be perfect in this life. But at the same time, we are responsible to do our best to lead leavenless lives. Now, the reason we need to be on guard, because Satan wants to influence our church and be part of it and corrupt it. Let's go to 2 Corinthians 11, verse 13 through 15. For such are false apostles, deceitful workers, transforming themselves into apostles of Christ. And no wonder. For Satan himself transforms himself into an angel of light, and sometimes appears to people in caves and gives them a false gospel. Did I say that? I did. Therefore it is no great thing if his ministers also transform themselves into ministers of righteousness, whose end will be according to their works. I pray that you won't be deceived. We need to recognize that Satan tries to infiltrate the body of Christ, the church, and tries to corrupt it from within. We need to be on our lookout, just like Jesus said, watch and pray always. God bless you. Good Lord willing, I'll see you again tomorrow.